Disclaimer. This podcast features a conversation between two individuals regarding assistive technology. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed during this episode belong solely to the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their respective employers. Furthermore, this discussion is for informational purposes only. Please note, many people in the neurodiverse community prefer identity-first language and describe themselves as autistic, which is also the language our guest typically uses. At the same time, there are individuals, families, and professionals who grew up with or prefer using person-first language, person with autism. We want to acknowledge these differences and honor the full range of perspectives within the community.
Welcome to episode 1 of Assistive Tech Today Podcast. I'm your host, Vinny L, and I would like to introduce you to the first guest would be Natalie Gonzalez. And a little funny side note before we get started is we actually just did this interview about an hour ago, but first tip to a podcaster, as this is our first episode, make sure you hit record when you start your podcast. So we had a practice run. We're all human. So, and again, this is the first podcast. So I'll just give you a quick overview. I'm an assistive technology specialist. I work for a company, Enabling Devices. I've been with them for 24 years. And Enabling Devices is celebrating this year its 50th anniversary serving the special needs population. So with that said, to help the podcast out, Enabling Devices is giving my listeners and viewers a special one-time discount code. If you go to visit enablingdevices.com and decide to make a purchase, the code will be listed in the show notes, but it's going to be AT Today 26, and that's for 10% discount. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Natalie Gonzalez, who's an SLP bilingual speech pathologist. She's been a speech pathologist for several years, and let's let Natalie tell us a little bit about herself. Natalie, welcome to the podcast once again.
Thanks, Vinny. I know we talked about maybe chatting in the future. We just didn't know that the future would be now.
Exactly.
Well, all we ever have is the present, right? So we make the most of it.
Right.
But thank you for letting me join part of this podcast that you're building. And I am a bilingual speech language pathologist. I've been practicing in different pediatric settings for the last 7 years in public schools. Private practices has mainly been where my heart has really been. There's a lot of creativity that goes into the private practice owners and things like that, and collaborative nature. I mean, there's collaborative nature everywhere, but that's kind of where I found my niche, as well as an outpatient pediatric part of a big hospital in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I've also been practicing in different parts of the U.S. With travel companies, and just an opportunity to move out to Colorado over a year ago. So it's been great to see that no matter where you go, there's a need, especially for bilingual populations. And I didn't start off as a bilingual therapist. In grad school, I just did not have the professional proficiency. And so it wasn't until later in my career that probably about year 3 in that I really started with the mentorship of bilingual SLPs that kept encouraging me, to keep going, keep improving my proficiency. And it took a lot of work, to be able to, learn from others, learn from different continuing education courses, and of course my own work just to improve it. A very personal goal of mine that started out with connecting with family members and staying tied to my roots. I am from South Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, and then it became a professional responsibility, really, to be able to serve a bilingual population. And I'm so thankful for all the bilingual SLPs that were able to mentor me on this journey. And I'm still learning everything, every day. There's so much to this field, so much to assistive technology. So I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, information about you, Natalie. Yeah, I mean, we're all on a journey of learning. Uh, doing this for 24 years, you still learn something new every day, and I'm always try to keep that optimism to always, not to be closed-minded, that, you can always learn something new. They always say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I don't believe that you can if you're willing to, if you have an open mind, which is great. So, we had talked before on the phone, we had met and, just said, it would be great to have you as a guest on the podcast, kind of unexpectedly, and which I'm glad, we did because, we did, like I said, we previously were discussing this earlier, but it's good. We got a practice run in. But, being that you've been a speech pathologist for a few years now, when you first came out of school and started, uh, you know because this is a tech podcast to cover technology, and one of my hopes, I was asked to do. So many people said, Vinny, you should do a podcast on assistive tech because you really are passionate about it and you like talking about it. Um, and I said, an example, we had talked, you never really heard of enabling devices, and we've been around for 50 years, and I hear, things similar like this all the time, and it's like, why? Because there's so many things, there's so many companies out there, there's so many things to know about in assistive technology that, you know, I want to spread the word. I basically want to let people know, what's out there. Like, I'm gonna look into the most latest tech that's out there, bring it to people's attention so they can understand and see what's available, and then have people like yourself and other people in the industry that can share or give information about this so in one place so people can learn about this. So with that said, when you first started, the big buzzword now is AI, AI, um, when you first started, even though it wasn't that many years ago, you didn't have this technology available to you. It wasn't really available mainstream. You had to rely on a lot of, personal, for data. You had to basically keep notes and, you know, a lot of manual ways of doing things. Even though we had computers, it's not the same as what we're experiencing today. So, I just want to get your take on, how you've noticed things have changed, especially when you have a big caseload of patients, you know, that time is so precious and you want to be able to dedicate the most time to your patients. But, if you're sitting there doing clerical work, it makes things tough. And the data, we can look at data so much differently today with technology. So, yeah, let's, I'd like to get your take on what you've seen change over the years.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just 7 years ago, or starting back in 2018 was when I entered the field. And by then, iPads had already kind of, become more accessible and things like that. But yeah, AI, if you would have asked myself 7 years ago, what is that? I'd be looking at you like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Um, and so it's crazy how even just in the last 2 years, it's now it's this buzzword, right? There's so much innovation going on. And interestingly enough, the first private practice that I worked for, we actually used manual documentation. And so we didn't have an electronic medical record system, and it just worked for the clinic, And so, but I always remember thinking that was a unique experience for me because I could connect with people, that have been practicing much longer than I had, and that was the way of doing things. And then there were, now I've worked for different practices or larger hospital systems and been able to use, industry leaders in EMR systems. And as somebody who's currently exploring non-clinical roles in assistive technology or health tech and education tech, ed tech, I just keep seeing more and more innovation of how do we make life easier for SLPs, whether that be creating materials, whether that be enhancing speech generating devices or also reducing documentation time. So it's really an exciting time to be able to explore and try out new tools. And there's so many innovators right now. Every day, every week, I'm running into, wow, look at what they're building. It's beyond just a YouTuber giving advice, for families on carryover, which is super helpful, but that is
Right.
kind of based on from that to now these AI tools that you can use to build things for the betterment of your patients, right? To customize things, make things easier for us.
Right, right. To make it more relatable and to tune it, fine tune it to them specifically, which is what, we're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's saving us, from the extra time. I mean, we always want to customize and follow the child's interests, and it takes a lot of extra effort, that it's not that face-to-face time with the client. It's behind the scenes, right? It's during your lunch and you're eating and you're trying to print out something for a home practice, or
Right,
in the evening, right? You're trying to finish documentation. And so it's great to see. I feel like this pediatric rehab and rehab in general, assistive technology too, we're finally like um, getting a seat at the table. I mean, we always had a seat at the table, but I feel like people are really seeing that like now the technology is much more accessible to be able to expand it into our world and really come up with some cool solutions.
right. You had mentioned earlier when we were doing our first run at this, you were saying you had one of your patients that, you were incorporating stuff about, food and things that, and you got a really good response from him, just things like that, these nuances, just to make it to feel at home, I guess, for them that you were talking about. He had a particular band that he liked, that you were able to incorporate that into some of his communication stuff, and it kind of really lit him up as he changed his whole personality was like excited to engage, which is a good thing when you're a therapist, to see that you're engaging with the patient and or the student, and that they're really understanding what you're trying to get across.
Yeah, to really have that, patient first and center, how do we make this work for an individual, for the whole person, right? And so in the assistive technology space, whether that be, a low-tech core board or mid-tech, like, some of the products that you guys have at enabling devices, or a speech generating device with high tech, right? That was the case with this teenager, and he had a dual diagnosis. He was an autistic individual, but also had Down syndrome. And he had already gone through the lengthy process, often it's quite lengthy, right, to get a speech generating device. Um, and it was not fully utilized yet, and so device abandonment is a real concern that as therapists and families have to navigate, right? How do we use this tool, right? How do we train and educate family members and the patient, and also explaining, what assistive technology does and where it helps, and how it doesn't replace, other modes of communication. And
Right,
we
right.
always want to look at, multimodal communication. It's just another tool. But it was really amazing to see in my time working with him, this device that was seen as, just something bulky he was carrying around and making, all kinds of, as the mom, shared with me, all kinds of noises in the
Hmm.
waiting room, um, really teaching her about this is communicative intent. Why is he going towards that button? And once we started adding, like we adding family members, he had a baby nephew, and he just lit up being able to talk about his baby nephew, and mom starting to see, wow, yeah, I can add a button. I can, learn how to back up something, and in her language too.
Hmm.
She's a Spanish speaker and her son is a bilingual. individual, and he lit up, and knowing that it's like, hey, we both are eating similar foods at home, and you like that too. All right, let's add that to the device.
Sure.
And then he really liked a certain type of music called banda in different groups, so made sure to add it to his device, and things became personal and meaningful to him. And that device was no longer seen as just something clunky to carry around. It's like, wow, like this is, a life-changing, a game-changing tool
Right.
for the family and for my patients. So it's those things that keep me going and keep me
Right.
so interested to see, like, okay, what else can we do? What else can we innovate and improve on?
Yeah, I mean, touching back to when we had spoken earlier about this, with device abandonment, it's always, like I had said, it's always the fear of the unknown. With me being a tech support person, I talk to people all the time, and they have to, they have a lot of challenges if they have somebody who's medically fragile, or if they just have a lot of things going on with if it's a family member or a friend or whatever. To learn something else, it's they're kind of standoffish because, like you said, you don't want, you want them to engage with the device. So, like, if you're working with someone in clinician settings, or when you're doing therapy, that's great, but it needs to carry over when it gets home, and it has to be something that's user friendly, and that, obviously, like you said, the mom now saw that she could do things on it, and she saw how much of a change it made for her son. That motivates her to be more, responsive to it. And this goes back to, um, things are so fast now. Like we were talking about the iPad. Like when the iPad came out, like around 2010, it was, pretty new, and we had started looking at it at work, and I'm like, what are we going to do with this thing? And like the apps were just slowly coming out. Apple wasn't even involved at that time, really. They were just leaving it up to the people, the app developers, to make these apps. They weren't really doing anything like with switch control and some other advancements that they had wound up incorporating. And once we started doing that, we started building mounting systems for it, and then it started taking off. But one of the things that helped give that momentum was familiarity, because people were buying them. I remember when my kids were little, they were babies. My wife had gotten an iPad for Christmas, and it was, if you had an iPhone, it was really user friendly, and you were used to it, so it wasn't so scary like, some of the more advanced devices. And people started using it, and it was easy. And again, the therapist probably had an iPad at home or an iPhone, so they weren't, it was an easy learning curve. And I think that's why it took off so well, but it was still slow and steady. It evolved it to, what it is today, but and it's a great tool, and other tablets like it, Android tablets and other, similar tech devices. Um, but with all this technology now, with all the data and the AI, that has done like tenfolds. It's accelerated within, I'd say, the last 2 years. It's really now, it's like really in the forefront. And there's not a time when I don't look at LinkedIn or online somewhere that there's not talk about AI. Either the people love it or they hate it. Again, I look at it as it's a tool, just like when the computers first came out. They're not replacing people. Things are changing, they're evolving, things are going to be different. But I think if you are somebody today that needs assistive technology, it's a good time to have it, to be in this era, because we have so much available and so much more coming on the horizon quickly. And we had said earlier, like, we looked at this podcast today. If we could fast forward 5 years from now, we would probably be laughing at, how much it more advanced. Like we had no clue, like they could do XYZ, where, a few years ago, it wasn't even something conceivable. But I'm excited, to follow along in the journey. And one thing we did touch on was one of the most important things with HIPAA compliancy, because there's a lot of data collected with some of these applications. How do we safeguard, our patients and our, students, that this, they have privacy, they have, they have rights and everything. So that's one of my only fear with the technology is hopefully it's going to be managed properly.
Yeah, absolutely, Vinny. And I think of course, right? Like with anything new, right? It's that fear of the unknown. How do we make this, approachable? How do we follow like code of ethics? And so I'm excited to see not only the innovation, but from EMR systems to people developing tools to help with documentation, or create materials. These developers and creators, just from connecting with some of them or seeing, their websites too. They really are interested in, and maybe it's because it's early stages. I don't know, right? As an outsider, but I've really been impressed to see how they're interested in, okay, what do the therapists think about this? And really seeing HIPAA and protection of PHI, personal health information, and things like that coming up in those conversations, with whether they have a personal connection, maybe somebody's mom was a speech therapist or they themselves are SLPs. It's been really great to see, that there is this, and not only an acknowledgement, but a follow through of, okay, we're going to, listen to these concerns about
Right.
ethics, about personal information. And so that's been exciting to see. And so I think as more development happens and that there's clinicians, eager and willing to give insight and help, can make sure that tech is moving in the best interest, not only of therapists, of the patients. I think, like you said, in 5 years from now, like we could be onto some really amazing things that we can't even imagine, at this
Right,
point in
right.
time.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on there, you were saying about, if they had somebody might, if in the family a member might have been a therapist, or they might have somebody that has some type of, special needs that motivated them to help create this. And, at the end of the day, the therapists are the soldiers. They're in the front line. So who better than to guide them of what they have and what they're missing, what they need.
Yeah, how
And
do we bridge that innovation,
right.
the
I mean,
problem solving? Yeah.
I touch back to working at Enabling Devices that, the company's been around for 50 years. They're one of the pioneers with accessible switches and all types of, basic or light tech AAC static display communicators. You would think by now that we would have invented every switch that is needed for every user, and no, we haven't. We've only scratched the surface. Every user is unique and different. This is not a cookie cutter business by any means. I mean, there's some general information, there's some general guidelines that we always follow, but to really fine tune them, it's individual. So we always take feedback to help develop, and that's how the products evolved over the years because there was a need that was not fulfilled, and then a product was made. Just like this technology with AI, as an example, because it's so powerful and it can do so many things, this is basically driving evolution in this industry to basically maybe close the gap and make things better, for the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm not too familiar with, how do we use like user experience and drive like a product, like it's not my expertise, but the little bit that, learning from others who are in that world, about how do we like improve with like human-centered design for like technology, especially assistive technology. And you're right, there is no like one size fits all, which keeps our jobs, exciting and trying to think of like how do we best serve, the users, the individuals, and it's a whole person, and so it's just been really exciting to see that drive innovation. There's a couple of really great innovators out there. I mean, there's a lot, right? But the two that I'm thinking about in assistive technology, at Flex Speak, they've really integrated AI and being able to expand access to, I mean, they must have over 20, 50 languages now. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure how many languages. They're really building something so cool, to be able to allow public school districts and private practices and, speech therapists like around the nation and beyond, right? To be able to have students easily, access a speech generating device like in their language, right? Being
Right.
able
To
to
support them.
toggle, yeah, and being able to toggle between languages, right? And then there's I recently had learned about Seaboard, and so that's more of an open platform. It can be used on any device, a phone, tablet, and the creator is an AAC user himself. Martin is his first name. I'm not going to try to say his last name, but he is based in Argentina and has a background in software development, but he is also has a diagnosis of ALS and uses assistive technology himself. And so it's really great to see, just this driving innovation. How do we make things better? And I'm just excited. I feel like this competition, healthy competition with innovation, it's all good and helping us,
Yeah.
keep
It
people at the center of it.
you know, these people, hopefully some of them I know, I have talked to some of them that they'll be future guests on the podcast so we can explore some of the great offerings that are out there. But, competitiveness drives innovation. And, this, like I said, this is a different kind of industry. Yes, it's a business. We all make a living working in some facet of it, but the common goal is to improve people's quality of life and give them dignity. And again, I had said this earlier, for therapists, it's a calling, that you do this type of work because you have to give so much of yourself to be good at it. Um, my avenue is a little different, but I am very passionate about what I do, and I take my job very seriously. And when I talk to parents, on the phone, and they tell me, about, they might have a child or somebody or a spouse. I'm a dad of kids, I have three kids and, a family man. And it's, I thank God that my children are healthy. And, it's like, I think about that and say, what can I do to help them if they need something that, we need to make something for them. Uh, it's important, and it's very fulfilling when you see that you've helped somebody and you've touched their life. And I've had people cry and I'm getting emotional. I've cried on the phone thanking me, so much. And that's a good feeling, in the soul that you've done your job and you've done it well to help someone. So again, it's definitely a rewarding thing. And like I said, for therapists, it's definitely, it's a calling that you do this to really help people. And at the end of the day, it's all about people. And again, that's one of the other reasons why I wanted to do this podcast. I really just wanted to spread, as much information out there as possible. And like the old saying goes, knowledge is power, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for what you said, not just about, assistive tech, but also therapists. And yeah, it really takes a village too, to have all this expertise come together and being able to, provide holistic care and we don't always have all the answers, and that's why we bounce ideas off of each other.
Hmm.
So I really like what you're building here with Assistive Tech Today. I think that's how we get the word out, right? About
Right.
new technology, innovation. It's a great thing, like 20 years from now, we would, or 20 years ago, I should say, I meant to say that we wouldn't be sitting here doing a podcast together and learning about these things. So it's really cool how we can
Right.
use tech to bridge these gaps.
Right. And to coin another old phrase, they always say teamwork makes the dream work, It's not about just one person. It's like you said, there are many, there are many people in the works to make everything, functional and, beneficial to people. So it's a combined effort. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to see, where else can we take this technology, especially for my own passions of AAC and how do we move forward with, multicultural considerations and I think it's just so fascinating the way that AAC has evolved, and there's a lot of great strengths, a lot of, really cool innovation that's been going on, but I would love to see, how else can we push the boundaries to, make sure that multilingual users are able not only to toggle back and forth between languages or improve pronunciation, but also having access to a system that really works and speaks true to the grammatical nuances of each language or the
right,
tonal aspects of language. Or I just saw something the other day that was I believe it was Toby Dynavox. It had an option to like change even this is not so much multilingualism, but prosody, and how do you convey, different tones like with a speech
right,
generation.
right,
So
right.
it's
Not
interesting.
not to
There's
be
so much
so
more.
robotic, to be,
Yeah.
more natural. So
Yeah. So it's
yeah. So
exciting.
we're definitely going to need to have you back on for maybe another, we'll call it the third episode.
That third time's a charm.
Third time, three times the charm. So yeah, we're gonna just I think we're gonna wrap it up here. And we, thank you for being on the podcast, Natalie, and sharing your information and all your knowledge with us. I appreciate it. And hopefully the viewers and listeners also appreciated it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vinny. Thank you for
Yeah,
inviting me on. I feel honored to be a guest and I'm excited to see all the cool things that assistive tech is going to bring.
thanks. So if you found this podcast helpful and you want to share it with a friend, please like and subscribe. Links are down below. Um, Again, if you get a chance, check out enablingdevices.com, and in the show notes we'll have the coupon code if you are, enjoy the discount. It's AT Today 26. And once again, I'm your host, Vinny Lavodi for Assistive Tech Today Podcast. And again, thank you, Natalie Gonzalez, for being a gracious host and coming on a second time because I forgot to hit the record button.
It's all right. Thank you, Vinny. Have a
All
great
right. You guys have a great day. Thanks for stopping by.